How are the jackdaws in the audio?
I can hear them a bit, but they're not going to disturb it too much.
Okay. So
They're just ambient noise, really. You can even mention them and just say...
well, I think we can just keep this bit in, because people already know how shambolic we are with our recordings.
They do. We like to just kind of roll into the main show, don't we?
So I'm going to set the scene now. I'm sat next to a load of ash logs that are gradually burning away, with a tea bag sat on top of that campfire, sort of burning its way through too. And over on the other side of the campfire from me is a man wearing one of those kaiwaka like gilet things.
Yeah.
Are they any good?
They are very, very good. I think I'm always quite precious that if they get ripped,
they're
going to be less waterproof, but they are really comfy, really warm.
British.
No.
No. So I said British rural stores have this real connection with Kiwi brands.
Yeah.
Kiwi stuff sells really well here. Yeah, I say that I'm wearing Swansea.
Yeah,
stuff.
that's a nice ghillie as well. I like that one.
Yeah,
those keep you warm.
But I don't know if it's sort of known, particularly if the Kiwis know how much of British agriculture and British rural workers are kept clad by Ridgeline and Kaiwaka and all these other New Zealand brands.
I don't know. I haven't really spoken to any Kiwis or Aussies for a while from like over there. So I don't really know. I think they must do, because they've marketed it well over here and pushed it. So yeah, I guess people coming back and going over there doing farm work, going over there sightseeing, see the stuff, bring it back.
I would guess that it's like the people who are in the brands, they're aware of how important this market is, but your average Joe on the street in New Zealand is not going to be aware of that.
No.
They might even like stuff that's from over here. You never know, because of the similar climates.
Yeah,
they might rave over Paramo or something.
Yeah, is everyone in New Zealand wearing regatta or gallet or something?
Yeah. No. Wouldn't that be funny?
Because there was a period where we had Flexethane, and those boil in the bag rubberized waterproofs were everywhere, particularly for milking and dairy farming and that kind of thing. And it was either that or the fake plaid fleece lined hoodies. Like Dickies ones or something like that. That was all you saw for years, and then gradually it was New Zealandified throughout.
Yeah, I think it's a good move. I think they do make better clothing, and mind you, Dickies pants are quite good, but the Kiwi stuff I do like. Swanee Dry stuff spot on.
That's Dickies as a brand there, we should point out, not just a guy called Richard.
Who sells things out the back of a van.
I think we should probably introduce our guest this week.
That's true.
We have Phil. You might know him from the internets as @Smithy Farm, but I don't know sort of how to introduce you, because anytime I speak to any farmers or anyone around here, they go, "Oh yeah, does hedgelaying, does this?" And they go, "Hang on, he's at Smithy Farm on Instagram." "Oh yeah, I know his stuff." Yeah. So you want to introduce yourself? Who are you, and what do you do?
I'm Phil Lewis. I suppose from the beginning, I've done a joinery apprenticeship, so I've always been hands-on, working outside. And as years and years have gone on, my sort of things have turned over to doing scything. I think scything has been the one big thing that's kind of pushed us more into a conservation area or more countryside. And then from the scything, it's kind of pushed into hedgelaying and advice sometimes on best practices. But yeah, I do a lot of different stuff, to be honest. And like the beekeeping is started off as a hobby, just something I always wanted to do. And then you sort of get quite, I could get some more bees. I can go and catch a swarm. And then you kind of rolls into 30 hives later and you're going, oh, this is getting quite large now.
You sort of accidentally became a beekeeper. You started off with a couple then, and then just did it get out of hand?
Yeah. Beekeeping seems to get out of hand quite quickly. If you start, it's quite, I wouldn't say addictive, but it's quite a good feeling when you're doing it. It's, there's that hum of the bees, there's the smells from the hive. I think that's something, and all the other stuff that goes with it, like cleaning boxes, putting frames together. They're all quite chilled out things.
This is why Richard won't let me have bees. Because he knows that I'd get one hive and then it would just snowball from there, and suddenly I'd be like hives all over the
The
vale.
backyard would be full of bees.
Yeah, it probably would.
I can see how it would develop on like that though, because you've got once you've got the initial equipment, once you've got the sort of the initial capital expenditure, you just need more hives then.
You do, yeah, and the skills to be able to know what's going on in a hive. For the first 2 years, I didn't even know my bees had swarmed. I was like, oh, there's less bees here. They must have gone. Oh, I can't see eggs. I didn't know what eggs were. And I don't think it was till about 2019 that I really got chucked in. So I had COVID, and there was loads of bees at this association, and we had to go and check them every week because no one else would do really. So yeah, I gained a lot of experience over a year checking 30 hives every week for a year.
Could you call honey a wild food? Do you think? Also, like, is it second stage wild food? Because what the bees are foraging on is wild, but you're bringing them back to one place for the honey.
I think on that, I'd probably say depending on scale. But then even if you do have 100, 200 hives, it's still wild. The bees are still wild, really, aren't they? They're not. Yeah. You can't domesticate a
You've
bee.
got kind of a contract with a bee, haven't you?
Yeah.
You provide a place for them. You can nick some of their honey.
Pretty much, yeah.
But they can sod off at will.
Yeah,
they're not fenced in.
Yeah, they'll disappear if you don't keep on top of them and check for swarm cells. Then you're going to lose them, and then if you lose them, you lose half your colony, half your honey crop, because they take that with them when they swarm. So the beekeeper really doesn't want the bees to swarm. So you're constantly either splitting or taking down queen cells. But there's lots of different ways that people seem to do the beekeeping. There's the commercial beekeepers, but I think that's slightly different. I wouldn't class myself as commercial. I think when you're getting over 100 odd hives, and you're getting more towards that stage.
How many hives do you have?
About 30. Yeah, in 2-3 different places. I think I might go back to another apiary that I left last year. I think that would be quite good to go back there, because I've got different ideas of how I'm going to manage them. So instead of being just a wild bee, so I suppose this is where they might become less wild, is if you're having F1 hybrided bees. That's going to is that changing from a wild bee to a modified bee?
Because they've been tweaked in the breeding process.
In the breeding process, it's very closed loop breeding. Then they pick out all the different things they want from one, all the different from another, crossbreed, and then get that F1 hybrid.
So it's like the difference between foraging and gardening, maybe, rather than
yeah.
So, do you move the hives around?
No.
They stay in one place on one side?
They stay in one place for, well, at the moment, at least a year they've been staying in one place. But I'd like to be able to just leave them in one place and not move them at all. They seem to develop better. They get used to their area. I guess they develop a certain genetic to that sort of area,
like hefted sheep almost.
Yes. Yeah.
Do they learn, and well, obviously, because everybody's heard about the honeybees waggle dance and things, so they know where their resources are. But is there even a thing of they know year on year where to look for the next batch of nectar, as it were, once one flower's over and one crop that might be nearby that they've been pollinating? Do they then know where to go to, or is that like really hard?
Do they have a calendar?
Yeah.
I think they must have something in them. I mean, if they go with the seasons. I mean, they're still sending out sort of scouts when it's really warm. They'll send out the scouts. I don't know whether they can smell. whether they might be able to
Yeah.
smell something. But they send out a lot of scouts, go around, try and find out the best, most efficient amount of nectar they can get, which is quite a lot of tree crops as well. Like
Yeah, I suppose all the blossom, the hawthorn and cherry and
Yeah.
blackthorn and things.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
If you ever want to bring bees here to consume all the Himalayan balsam we have and the rhododendron, be our guest.
I would say Himalayan balsam has been a bit of a saviour this year for me, because it's just been a dismal year for beekeeping, really, or insects in general, I guess. Just so wet.
It's a divisive thing, isn't it, for sort of conservation, that because there are so many campaigns to remove Himalayan balsam as an invasive non-native, and particularly along riverbanks and an area even like here where it sort of crowds out any other vegetation from coming up. But it's fantastic for pollinators and particularly bees. I've got paid to do photos of Himalayan balsam for some wildlife project, I won't say which one, years ago. And a load of my photos were rejected because they had bees in them on the Himalayan balsam, and they wanted to vilify the Himalayan balsam for the project. They said, well, we can't show bees on it because it's quite good for bees, so we can't show that bit. It was an interesting one, but it is that conservation is not one long linear thing.
No.
It's conservation is, okay, what are you trying to conserve and how, and at the expense of what? Because if you're trying to get rid of Himalayan balsam, then it is worse for the pollinators in that area, potentially.
Yeah.
I think it's especially if, like from my experience, because I did a lot of work on Himalayan balsam removal, when it's got to that stage where it's just a monoculture of Himalayan balsam, it's not like when you remove it there's going to be other native plants there instantly that the bees can forage from instead. You've probably just denuded that area, and it's going to take a while for the seed bank of native things to kick back in, and for there to actually be the nectar and things for native pollinators and for your honeybees as well. So yeah, it is a bit of a tricky one to navigate, the Himalayan balsam.
Yeah. You're still not having bees, though. I'm not letting Amy have bees.
Yeah, I know.
You can have goats, maybe.
I don't have time for bees right now. That's like a later in life thing, I think.
They do take up a lot of time as well. You know, if you don't want to lose your bees, you've got to be checking every 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
There was a period about 10 years ago where suddenly beekeeping became really fashionable, wasn't there? It became the middle class hobby.
Yeah.
And lots of people got back garden bees. Did that sort of wane off again? Did they all get rid of them and give them back to...
I think they just either got rid of them, give them to other people, give them to other beekeepers. I've been to a few places where people have had bees in their back garden, or they've had a swarm in their back garden, and the neighbours going, it's ridiculous, we can't sit in our back garden because of all these bees.
Yeah, we had that.
Yeah.
We had that with our neighbour.
And you're like, well, is that... Yeah, I
get that.
I think that's where clubs can play the part.
Yeah.
That if people are really interested in it, like the association I'm part of, they'd love to have more people come in there checking out. But again, it's a club, it's time.
So I have this theory that the next middle class hobby, maybe there's been some other stuff in between, but the beekeeping was in there. I think one of the next ones is going to be hedgelaying. I think middle class hedgelaying, either having hedges laid on your property or being involved in it yourself, is going to become sort of the next thing. And I think it's people like you that are to blame for it.
Cool.
So how did you get started with hedgelaying? How did you make the jump to that as a thing?
I think I was thinking about this the other day. I think it's always been there to a point. I always used to be in the countryside in hedges with ferrets and dogs and just mates. So I've always seen hedges and always seen how they've grown. And even on building sites, I remember a labourer saying, oh, I can lay that hedge. And I remember him laying it. I remember us all sitting on the thing going, you don't know what you're bloody doing. You can wreck it. You're just cutting it all down. And then I've done volunteer days, and much the same as scything, really. I've done volunteer days with placing the whirl. which kind of really was a bigger part. And then I started doing volunteering in North Wales, and then with doing the scything, I suppose it wasn't until I really went on this estate that I had something to really get my teeth into. So it's like, there's 400 meters of hedge, go for it.
Yeah.
And I think I'm at a point now where I'm pretty good. I think I know I can definitely hold my own in a hedge and be able to lay it. The different styles is a challenging one, because there's lots of little bits and pieces that you've got to do to make it into that style.
There's a sort of a rule with traditional crafts. If you don't know if you're doing something correctly, if you post a photo of it on Facebook in whatever group it is for that traditional craft, you will quickly find out whether you have done it correctly or not, because somebody will come along and tell you exactly what you've done wrong.
Yeah.
And I think like every time I look onto the hedgelaying groups, there is always like, no, those binders are too tight at the top, or no, that's 5 degrees off the wrong angle, or whatever, from somebody who hasn't done it for 30 years or keeps doing it constantly, but their whole life is nailing that hedging style to exactly that 1 degree perfection every single time. And it's really culturally fascinating when you watch those arguments online, because hedge laying to a certain style, the sort of, from me as an outsider, the style looks like it's secondary. The main thing is you are creating a continuous living fence that is a good conservation zone, it's a good habitat, it's stock proof, it's healthy, it will keep living. That's the key. Whether it's Dorset style or Devon style or anything like that might be more to do with the shape of the hedge that was there already, or the land, or
the animals as well. Different animals that they would have had. Sheep
or cow versus those kind of things. What are you working on currently? What sort of, have you just finished something, or have you just about to start something?
Yeah, I suppose there's the hedge on the estate at the moment that I'm doing, which is Midland style. But I've done the Midland style on a nicely planted hedge and it looks perfect, but trying to do it on something that's very sparse, some of the pleachers aren't brilliant. It's very challenging to make something look exactly like you see on Instagram and Facebook. So you almost look at it as long as it's late, it's almost a hedge restoration, really, of trying to get it back into a rotation. Almost, this is why I did the coppicing course, was because you can see the links that when you're doing coppicing, you can see where the hedge laying has come from. I suppose it's a bit the chicken and the egg, maybe.
You look at the British landscape and the British farming landscape particularly, and the hedges are the underpinning part of that, and that, or at least the traditional management that was the hedges were part of. So you have the division between fields, they were stock dividers, but they were also part of a chain of woodland products and coppice products. So like the woodland we're sat in now, I'm fairly sure at one point was originally planted to make coppice wood products. It's just that market died before these trees could initially be harvested, and they've all grown up to the height that they are now. So I think this was going to be a coppice once, but you used to have these all over the UK, small woodlands that were managed to provide materials for certain things. So some things would be going off to make cartwheels, and some things would be going to make charcoal for everything from making iron through to gunpowder and all sorts of other things. And some things were going to make binding materials and hedge making materials, like it's binders, spars and stakes. Those are the three. The hedge bit and the hedge laying bit is so culturally linked to those other management practices, because the hedge was integral to the boundary along with the ditch, and the ditch that often went next to it was part of the drainage, which meant that marshy field then could become pasture and gradually become a more useful field over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but it needed a hedge next to it to be maintained. But that meant you had a hedge layer and a ditch digger and someone working in a coppice somewhere producing the bits for it. And it was part of this network of rural employment, and that rural employment meant that you had a wide cultural span of, you were making things here for a hedge layer at the other end of the county maybe, or something like that. And that's the bit I really like with this. Is it's a good way of making a nice hedgerow, and it's a good way of making something that's really good for conservation and habitat. But I don't know, anytime I do anything approaching coppicing or hedge laying or something like that, I feel like I'm sort of dipping my toe into history a little bit, or like you're stirring up the pot of ghosts that exist in the countryside. Because we have this long history of management around us that people forget now. I hate it when people sort, oh yeah, we're out here in the wilderness. It's like, no, you're in a coppice in Essex. It's not, you're not in the wilderness, but also you're not being respectful of the history of that place, you know, and our indigenous history in the British Isles. Sorry, that was a completely unwanted rant that just derailed the whole thing. I had
to
a
get
point.
us back onto track.
I had a point. Yeah.
You said about the Midland style. Can you just like vaguely refresh my memory on what that looks like?
For the audience as well.
And for the audience as well.
Yeah. So I might.
Even just vaguely,
vaguely,
are
I
there
would say
binders on it?
there are binders on it. Yeah. So
yeah.
it gives it a lot more structure to the hedge, and it almost then looks like a fence, really. And it keeps bullocks. It's taller, so it's, I think, around a metre, if not a little bit more than a metre tall, than the binders. So it's a good height. It's solid that the cows can't come up and push. They might push against it, but they wouldn't be able to push the pleaches up.
Yeah.
And the pleaches are the ones that you cut at the bottom and lay over.
And then the binders are like you weave flexible branches on the top.
Yes.
Like you're weaving a basket and they just hold it all down and tie it all into place.
Tie it all in together. So when you shake the top of it, the whole hedge moves down the row. And then as that grows, within a year, you know, it's solid.
Yeah.
Because that is the thing with hedge laying. Often you're cutting it back to really quite a narrow thing. Yeah. Whereas when you see a hedgerow that's been cut by a flail mower, one of those big machines on an arm on a tractor, they're about a metre wide. And they are quite chunky, and they're about as wide as the mower.
Yes.
The head, really. But a laid hedge is almost like a fence. It's I was about to say it's that far apart, but I'm holding my hands apart here, and that is no
really
use on an
podcasts.
Audio podcast. So it's what I was like, about a foot apart.
By the time you got like the brush on the side, you must be getting towards 2 or 3 foot. And again, different styles are slightly different.
Yeah. And competition, if you're competition hedge laying, they always seem to look a lot narrower, because there's like this is just from what I've seen, but it's like they've trimmed off every single side branch so that they've just basically got one stick that then gets cut and laid down. Whereas hedge laying, like we've done, and as I've seen for conservation that's done by people who aren't professionals, perhaps, it's kind of leave the side stuff in because you can shove that into the hedge a bit more, or just leave it in place so that the hedge is initially bushy and better for wildlife, I would say. But
I think sometimes if conservation side of it is to make it more dense so birds can nest in it, or it can be that corridor. But it was always done like that, so the hedge would renew and you'd get nice straight shoots coming off the side. It's cleared on one side, so the shoots at the bottom can come up and not be impeded by anything else.
Yeah.
So like you'd have the brashy side of the hedge towards, when they did lays in fields, the brashy side of the hedge would be on the animal side. The other side that was all cut and flush would be on the arable side. So there'd be nothing eating the new shoots.
What if you didn't have an arable side?
So if you didn't have, I suppose I'd still look at it that, like nowadays, I'd want to clean the bottom out so you get new shoots and nice clean new shoots at the bottom. Because if you don't, the hedge is pretty much going to die off eventually if you leave big bits of brush in. I know there's wildlife hedging and different things.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you don't know what the hell we're talking about, maybe if you're an American or something like that, go and look up what a laid hedge looks like, because it's a really weird thing to get across in a discussion if you don't know what we're talking about, because you have to it's a hedge is just nothing but a row of trees in a line, but the trees then are cut through 7/8 sort of of the way through until you've got just one thin sliver of growing material that connects the top of the tree down to the roots underneath, and you bend that bit over to 45 degrees, 50 degrees, even further depending on the style, and then that becomes a linear thing going horizontally or at an angle rather than going straight up. It will stay alive, and the moisture from the roots will carry on going up through that living material at the side and then getting into the rest of it, and then that tree will carry on growing and will still put shoots up and out to the side, but it will take a little bit of time to recover. And the species that are involved and the way you cut it and the way you manage it afterwards, and like Phil's saying, if you take the brash or clean up the bottom of the hedge, all of these things will affect how well it will come back. If you are listening to this and going, well, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, go and look up a photo of one of these hedges, particularly look at hedge laying styles, the different styles for the different regions of mainly England, but there are some for Wales as well. It's mad when you look at it and you think, how did somebody look at that and go, okay, that is how I'm going to manage this field with this really beautiful pattern that's really functional, that's really strong and bound together and will work both as a thing of beauty and as a functioning living fence using all natural carbon neutral materials. It's this mad thing, I think. So because we kind of take it for granted because you do it. This is what you do as a job, and Amy's done this for work in the past, and I've sort of done a bit of it around the edges, but you can't take it for granted. It's a bloody marvelous thing when you look at it, and it's a thing of beauty.
I'll tell you what, I'll put a link in the show notes to the hedgelaying. I forget whether they're a society or an association.
NLH,
the national one, because I'm sure they've got like pictures of all of the different styles on that website.
They have, that's a good point,
When you go to the game fair and country shows and stuff like that, when they have a stand there, they have a little hedge.
They do. It's fantastic.
A little bonsai hedge in there.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That shows the styles. But it's something that we're going to be running courses with Phil next year, or at least we're planning to anyway. So if they're running, they're in the show notes for this episode. But our interest in this related to wild food is when we go foraging along a hedgerow and we go, okay, so these are hawthorn leaves, you can eat these like this, and then later in the year you'll get the flowers, and then you'll get the berries from the flowers, and they all have this particular chemical and this taste and all of that. You can't you can't separate that out from the fact that is in a hedge, that is in a living linear forest that's really narrow down the side of a lane that you wouldn't get in other countries in the same way, or in other areas where you would get this long line of wild food that's also a habitat for other things.
And it's not only the actual trees that are in the hedge, it's like the stuff that grows at the bottom of the hedge as well. It's all of your little vegetation. Your wild garlic, jack by the hedge, loads of different things that grow because they want to be basically at the edge of a woodland. That's the habitat that's the niche that they occupy, and a hedge is basically a version of that. And
then you've got things like game and cover for game, and where wildlife lives, and what keeps deer in or keeps deer out, and all of these other things. Hedges are integrally related to land-based wild food in the UK. You can't separate them out.
It must be fun for you at certain times of year going out and looking at hedges that you're going to go for, because you can see the different berries and I'm guessing greys on them slightly.
Yeah, not a lot of grazing, to be honest. No, I like going back to the hedges because a lot of the hedges I don't tend to see in advance before I go and lay. It's just like, oh, we're going to be doing a hedge over there next season, and you don't necessarily go and look at it, but going back to it the next year and seeing how all the shoots have come back at the bottom, all the new life in it, sometimes maybe a bit of blossom if you've managed to leave a bit of brashy feathery part on the top, one I did last April and went to see a couple of weeks ago, the dog rose, what were they? Dog rose hip? Are they hip?
Rose
Rose
hips,
hips,
yeah.
Rose hips.
Yeah.
They were huge, and it was
Oh,
it was
wow.
all the way down the hedgerow, and I thought
Fantastic.
that is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's something very satisfying to see the effect you've had on a landscape, positive effect. Seeing something, I did that, I made that thing happen, I made that thing possible through your own actions. It is incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, rewarding, satisfying. Yeah.
I don't think you can underestimate how important that is, even to things like mental health and stuff like that. Having the ability to affect change in that way, a positive change. I think that's why gardening and stuff like that is always linked to positive mental health. And for us, it's like woodland management and those kind of things. And it's being able to see, yeah, that thing exists now, or that thing is doing that thing better now because of something that I've done.
Yeah.
Let's talk about scything then. So how did you end up doing stuff with scything? And we're talking about scything as in Grim Reaper, big curved blade on a stick, scything.
So it was just in my own back garden, really. I wanted to use something different than a strimmer. Decided to use my granddad's scythe. And pretty much after about 5 minutes, I'd snapped it because it was so woodwormed.
Oh.
So, yeah. And then after that, I went on a bit of a pursuit to have a look at Austrian scythes.
Because what's that brand? Fox?
Scur and Fuchs. Yeah. Yeah, they're very good. I think they've been making scythes for 800 years.
Wow.
And they've sort of refined it over that time to this point, and they're brilliant tools to use. So that's how I got into it. I've done scything with Amy before.
Oh God, we've had some sessions doing
yeah.
scything.
Which was good fun.
I took you to some interesting places.
Yeah.
Some
And
near vertical slopes.
Why were you scything? What was that in aid of?
We were scything for meadow management. So I was working on, it was through several different projects actually.
Yeah.
It was the Living Churchyards project was the first one, where we were trying to introduce some traditional management techniques to churchyards and to try and increase them for biodiversity, increase the biodiversity in the churchyards. So scything was one of them. You just had to be a little bit aware of people and not leaning scythes against gravestones, as happened on one occasion. A little bit Grim Reaper-y. And then there was Coronation Meadows project and other habitat management. But I was running sessions for volunteers, and you came along to help because you were a proficient scyther already at that point. So I knew that we would get through. There was you and Richard and Simon.
Yes.
Who would quite often all attend if there was a scything thing happening, and you were just machines, which was great because the first time that you pick up a scythe, it feels really alien. It's a very natural movement, and it's really nice to do once you've got into it. But trying to describe to somebody the movement that they've got to do to scythe and how to make it not hurt your back, as a lot of people find at first, because they're bending in the wrong place and putting the weight into the wrong place, and sharpening and a blade, which is something that most people aren't used to doing as well, and that makes all the difference.
Sharpening.
Because they're not very, they're not.
Thing.
Yeah, it's not like an axe blade or something like that, which is sharp, but it's still quite broad. These are very thin, very
like
pointy.
Razors.
If somebody's leg was in the way of the point of that scythe as you're swinging around, it would go through the leg, wouldn't it? It's
you could easily take somebody's tendon out if you were too close to them. Yeah, from behind kind of thing. Yeah, it's... Yeah, and then we did haymaking and all sorts. It was fantastic. We had these hand hay balers, and we'd just go to somebody's place and cut an acre of grass and then go back and turn it over the following days so that it dried out, and then make hay, or just pile it all into one massive pile of hay. Yeah, it was really good fun, but really hard work, because you're doing it in summer. You're trying to do it in the driest, hottest spells of weather that you have. It's really hard work.
It is.
Really hard work.
I think it's very rewarding again because you can see an area that you've done.
Yeah.
So if you've done 50 square meters, you're kind of looking back going, wow, that's really good.
Yeah, because it's really good for habitat, for management and things.
I was going to say, why scythe
Why?
rather than just
Why
running through
scythe?
with a brush cutter and a blade?
So the reason for scything is that if you're using a brush cutter and a blade, or a strimmer, more even, you're kind of mulching the grass.
Yep.
So you're cutting it, but it doesn't just slice it through in one neat cut. It mulches it down as well.
Because it like munches up the grass as it
Yeah.
the grass kind of falls back into the strimmer head.
Yeah, kind of. And then it just ends up sitting on the ground. It's more difficult to rake it up at all. And when you're trying to get a wildflower meadow back into good management, you want to almost deprive it of nutrients. Because if you have added nutrients, it gives the grasses more strength, and then they outcompete all of those native, slightly more delicate species. But those species can survive on nutrient-poor soils. So you kind of want to create nutrient-poor soils so that the grasses and more tough things can't survive because they need more nutrients, and then it means that the wildflowers do better, essentially. You could be really selective with the timing that you did that at, so that the wildflowers had gone to seed and seeded, but the grass hadn't, was the ideal bit. And then when you were leaving it to dry, you were turning it and dropping all of the seeds from the wildflowers out and like tossing them around a bit. And then you could just rake up all of the grass and things so that the nutrients didn't go into the soil, and you'd just compost them elsewhere. And then it meant that gradually over the years, that site would become less nutrient rich and more biodiverse. That's all the aim.
It sounds good as well for low carbon, low impact projects because there isn't a two-stroke engine blaring along the whole time.
You can have a good group of people, a community group, volunteers, all with scythes. They can all communicate. You can do, I would say, the same, if not more, than you would do with a strimmer. You get a better job. Again, that depends on the user. But
it does.
I think it's a very viable way of cutting grass, really.
It is. And you can also do it on slightly more rough terrain as well once you've got into it. You're more aware of where you're putting your feet. A lot of people prefer it because if you're using a strimmer, you can't hear things like wasps or bees that might be nesting on the ground. If you're using a scythe, you're well aware that they're there and you can stay clear of them. Whereas with the strimmers and brush cutters, I've heard of so many people who have, because it's so loud, you just go straight through the nest because you have no idea they're there.
Yeah, I've gone through a wasp nest with a strimmer, and it was they were in the helmet, and I think I probably did a 4-minute mile that day. Just trying to get away from
I'm
them.
not surprised, and it's better for, people say it's better for quite a lot of invertebrates as well, because you're not scalping it. You're not getting right down to ground. It's not as
better
disturbing.
For toads and things like that as
better
well.
For toads and things. I think we found a hedgehog one time when I was scything. Yeah. So we managed to move that out of harm's way, and it's just a better way of doing it. And there are ways of managing large areas without scythes that are good as well. But
have you seen it, in the States, scything has become almost a signal as well of regenerative agriculture and small scale permaculture agriculture. Sort of in the Wendell Berry model of connection to landscape and the opposite of intensification. I saw it first through a guy called, I think his Dave Madden, I think, but he's aspiring peasant on the Twitters or X, whatever the hell we'll call it now. Ex-Navy SEAL. I think he's Pacific Northwest or somewhere, but there's like this whole thing of American scything Twitter, where you get, rather than being black-pilled or white-pilled or red-pilled, you get scythe-pilled. So regardless of your political opinions, you are there for the scything. You're there for scythe management of your lawn or your meadow, which I quite like. It's like return to traditional crafts parallel to politics.
it's like it's a really mindful activity as well.
Yeah.
It's very rhythmical. you kind of get into a particular way of walking whilst you're scything quite
Yeah.
often. It's that
The
repetitive
sway.
motion. And it's also just really nice chatting to people as you're doing it. If you're on your own, you just become really mindful and focused and just doing it.
Yeah.
And if you're with a group of people, it's a real nice community feel, and yeah, it's great fun.
It is. It's got a lot of
Got a lot of benefits.
things going for it. But I think a lot of people just don't have the blade sharp. I don't think they have the peening down.
No.
Which is hammering the blade to make it very thin, and then able to cut grass, quite fine grass, really nicely. They used to do bowling greens with scythes.
Really?
So to get that sort of cut, it's quite amazing.
Because you've got to hold it exactly at the right angle, otherwise you're going to drive the point into the ground. Presumably.
Yeah, there's a lot of feel to go with it. You've got to have it in the right place. I mean, the setup of the snath is really good because it's very. You can move the handles up and down to your own body size, but you've still got to hold it in the right position and get that cut. It's more of a circular cut, not a cross cut like a chopping cut. It's a slice, if you like.
I always used to say to people, it's like when you're trying to cut a tomato. You don't just put pressure down, you have to slice,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Tomato or tomato, depending on where you're from in the
It's
world.
tomato. We're saying tomato. None of this ridiculousness.
Oh dear.
There's conversations around all this, conversations about conservation, around all of this, that it's weird. And we were talking about this last time you came up to the woods, that you sort of look at conservation stuff and wildlife meadows and hedgelaying and scything and beekeeping and all of that, and they're sort of, in some way, on the surface, it all skews very, very left of centre. But then you've got, it all ties back into a self-reliant mindset and a relying more on the individual and smaller community and less on the state and less on large global models of commerce and things like that, which in some way skews more libertarian, which for some people is sort of is trending towards the right. And you've got this very strange overlapping within traditional crafts and traditional management of landscapes, mostly in the Anglosphere, but I mean, I don't know enough about anywhere else to talk about that. But I always find myself in very interesting political territory with this stuff, where you sort of, the people who are very interested in it you could probably predict their voting patterns.
Yeah.
The sort of people who voluntarily come and want to really learn about all this stuff don't tend to come from a right of centre standpoint, but a lot of the people who do it often end up very centrist. They don't tend to skew in one political direction or the other, because I don't know if it's connection to landscape, connection to place, because you're more pragmatic. I don't know, but it is something that we get on like our courses. If you come from a background or a viewpoint of right of centre, you're probably coming to us more to learn to live off the land or something like that as your reason for coming on a foraging course or wanting to consume our content. Whereas if you're more interested in the conservation, if you're interested in the nature and the wildlife and the habitat, you tend to come from left of centre. But I'd like to see myself as really centrist. Because I don't really care about either side on the political thing. I just really like plants. I really like food. I like woodlands and meadows and stuff like that.
And being outside.
Just being outside.
And connecting with it and having an impact on it. Positive impact.
But then that comes back in the other way around with when people deliver courses and deliver training and deliver that sort of stuff, particularly, and this is what I'm coming back round to, like the projects you used to work on, Amy, were always had a very left of centre bias to them almost in the delivery. Like you've said before about the Wildlife Trust projects you worked on, you could do them to a degree, but then the moment it involved a gamekeeper or basque or anything involving shooting or field sports, or even if it was just talking about deer management or
mink control.
Mink control, which voracious predators, non-native predators.
Destroying our waterfowl populations.
Yeah.
Water vole populations have massively declined, mostly because of mink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if you brought on anything to do with shooting or anything like that as part of that project, it was suddenly, nope, can't talk about that. That's the wrong political stance. Almost, it's the wrong association.
Yeah, it very much was. Very much was. I had complaints.
Yeah.
Because of it. So, yeah.
That's the thing that I find really, really fascinating. That people really care about something up until a point, but then if it's a political out for them, they go, oh no, yeah, but we can't do that. Can't do that thing. Why? Even if it's completely in line with the project and everything we want to do and your stated aims, it's the wrong color of rosette, so we can't do it. And I think when we were talking about this last time, it was something I'd heard elsewhere, so it's not my idea, but it's this idea of the political horseshoe. There are some things which, like buying milk directly from farm, or buying vegetables directly from producer, or honey, buying local honey directly from the person who's working in contract with the bees, is sort of so far left, it's almost to the right. It's this horseshoe of ideas. If you have the political spectrum bends in the middle, and the left and the right almost come together in some places. And there are some things like connection to food, connection to landscape, independence of food source, independence of management, do skew very
Both
left and very
ways.
right. So it's
a middle ground, which is quite good. If you can find a middle ground for people to just come together and bring that community back, then it's a good thing.
And is that because it's linked more towards a traditional craft or a smaller community way of doing things, which was your political views didn't matter as much as your ability to function within that community? To be a farmer, to be a blacksmith, to be a labourer, to be the person providing the goods for that community, your political views didn't matter as much as your ability to be valuable to that community.
Yeah.
I like being able to bring all this stuff together in a conversation, because I like finding out why people come on our courses and why they come on your courses, and why people want to learn. Why do you want to learn to scythe? You know, if you've got a postage stamp for a garden, why are you coming on a course to learn how to scythe? Or hedgelaying courses. There aren't many people coming on our courses who've got this huge network of linear hedge that they need to learn how to manage themselves, or they're coming on a one-day course to learn how to do that. I'm guessing most people who come on a hedgelaying course might have one hedge in the garden.
Yeah.
That they'll lay once every 5 years, every 7 years. So they might do it once in the cycle of owning that house. So it's why do people want to learn to do these things, even though they don't need it for work? They don't need it to manage that land, but they really, really want to do it.
I suppose it's connection to the land, isn't it? It's just that doing something good, isn't it? If you're laying a hedge, you're rejuvenating it. You get that feeling of, I'm doing something. And I suppose it doesn't matter whether you're left, right, centre. It's still valuable.
So is it back to that thing of you can be there at the end of the day or the end of the week and look back at all of this stuff that you've done, look down that row of hedge and see, I've done all of that, and then you come back in a year's time and see what it looks like. You know,
absolutely.
When we do the stuff in here and the bits of coppice we've managed elsewhere and the other bits of woodland, I look coming back to a tree that I've cut down to the base, to ground level, and coming back in 2 years' time and seeing it covered in small branches that are now twice my height in just 2 years of growth, and it's still a living tree, and it's still the same tree, but it's now a completely different shape. That hits my heart and my soul in a way that I can't describe, in a way that when I was like 17, I wouldn't have predicted that I would be so excited to see a tree that I've cut back to a stump that has now put out new shoots. It's mad, isn't it?
It is. It is something that it's really hard to describe why that feels so good, as it were.
So this has been an episode which I could just keep talking to Phil for hours, and this is always a problem. Every time he comes over, we take about 3 hours to go through what was meant to be a quick meeting. Stuff like traditional crafts, traditional management of land, traditional connections to the landscape are intrinsically tied to wild food, at least in the UK and Europe. And I think if you are interested in wild food, if you're interested in the way those landscapes are managed, you really, really should take a look at the different ways those landscapes could be managed, and maybe the way they used to be. And if you like going looking for food in a hedgerow, or if you have that interest in healthier food or food from the wild in one form or another, then I think you have to be interested in how the wild, in inverted commas, is made or managed. Or look, if you do this to it, what happens to it? What happens to it next year, and in 5 years' time, and in 10 years' time? Just as much as you can be interested in how clean the rivers are, or how healthy the population of this animal is, or something like that, because at the end of the day, this is habitat management. So
I think the thing is as well is everyone that does hedge laying and scything, it's all observation based, really. So you're seeing things over years and years. So people that have done it for 40, 50 years, that they're saying this is a good thing to do, this is the way we do it, this is why we do it in this style. It's for a reason, because they understand it. They can see what's going to happen to the hedge in 5 years' time. They can see if all that's left in and it's not cared for, it's just going to be a mess.
It's because they've seen 30 different iterations of how to do it, so they know which is the best way, or at least what will happen in those 30 different scenarios.
I suppose this is what leads to people who've been doing it for a long time, just looking at a hedgerow and going, this one isn't actually going to lay right now. What we need to do is cut it all down, let it coppice back, and then lay it, because it's just too far gone. Or we can lay these bits of it, but we're going to have to coppice that bit, so it's all shoot back. And then on the next cycle of laying, it'll be ready to go. Type thing.
I was thinking that with a hedge down by the roundabout in Ruthin.
Oh yeah.
Where it was a very tall stand of trees, very gappy, and it was cut back down right the way down, and there was comments on the Facebook group for the town, and people moaning about it everywhere. But now all of that's come back as a much thicker hedge with long, tall, straight stems, which would be perfect for laying now. So I wonder whether that's what they actually had an intention of doing that.
It may well have been, yeah. I think there was a funding, I think part of, not Glass, I think it's Tir Gofal, the one before the Glaster, which is Welsh government funding. I think they had a bit within that for restoring hedgerows where they were overstood, where they were just a row of trees, essentially. And because there was one done near where I used to live, and I was devastated because I didn't understand it at the time. But it was a really big, thick kind of hedgerow. It got flailed, it got cut with a mower, but it still looked quite good. But they just completely cut it all down, did a load of planting with tiny little whips, tiny little saplings, and now that looks really good, and they're going to lay it any day now by the looks of it, and it's perfect.
It's regenerating it, isn't it? Coppicing it down, and then you'll get a better, thicker hedge.
It brings it back to life as well. There's certain, like hawthorn trees, they live longer if they're part of a hedge that gets laid on a rotation. They get laid in a good management style, whereas a hawthorn that's just left to grow into a tree won't necessarily live as long.
Yeah. So that hawthorn that's right behind you there, if we cut, it sounds mad, but if you cut 7/8 through that trunk and bent it and pointed it in that direction and staked it down, it would live for longer.
Yeah, it would grow new shoots and everything, which obviously they're part of the original tree, and then as the really old bits of it may start to degrade, all of those new shoots will be bulking out over the years and living longer. And
And then when you come back to lay that hedge, that whole stem, say in 20, 30, or sometimes a lifetime, 60 years, you'd cut that one that you'd originally laid out. So that would get cut out altogether, and then all the new shoots would come back in for that rotation.
Because that's the thing, is that some of the hedgerows in the UK might have 300 plus year old trees in them.
I think
that have just been laid over and over again.
Down south that are about 800 years old. I'm sure I've seen in a book that they were the hedgelaying book, 800 years old.
Yeah, particularly some of the stuff like the Dorset Hollowways and stuff like that, where it's the hedges have formed part of the tunnel over a sunken road.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so that it's been, as long as a road's been there, there's been that hedge, and that some of those roads are, some of them go back nearly 1,000 years. So yeah, same thing.
And they've just constantly been a home for wildlife in that time. And they've acted as cover, they've acted as shelter for livestock, for wildlife. They probably got basically ancient woodland.
Just a long, thin one.
Just a long, thin one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really important. Really important.
So where can we send people to go and find your stuff, Phil?
It's mainly Instagram and Facebook, really. I think we were talking before, saying it would be good to do YouTube and good to do other social medias and websites and different things. So I suppose that's on the cards to move towards. But basically on Instagram, it's Smithy_farm_, and same for Facebook. That's where you'll see everything that I'm doing from day to day, week to week.
And it is you are going through a sort of a rotational calendar of activity there as well.
It is. It's very seasonal what I do. Hedgelaying in winter, then on to market gardening, scything, bit of joinery in between. The beekeeping as well. The bees have got to be checked every week really, but sometimes it's a bit longer than that. So yeah, it feels very seasonal. I feel very attached to the land really, and to the landscape.
There's somebody listening to this who will be thinking from the description of that you have possibly the perfect life. Somebody will be listening to this on a Monday morning, sat in an office cubicle. And if you are this person, I'm not picking on you. I'm just getting into your headspace, listening to the man who spends his winters in a field doing hedge laying and then preps the market garden for growing in the spring and then is looking after the bees in the interim. That is possibly the perfect life for them. This is why you're the happiest man I know, probably.
Nice. Very, very optimistic all the time. Yeah, I would say I'm quite optimistic.
Yeah. You never have to work out in the wet
are.
and cold. Never get stabbed by blackthorns or
wear a lot of leather.
Yeah,
so you don't get stabbed by blackthorn.
Yeah, because like hedge laying looks really fun from the outside until you're in the chainsaw helmet.
Really, yeah. And again, I think a lot of the traditional crafts can be romanticized, and when you're actually doing them and it's cold, it's wet, your hands are sore.
Yeah.
But again, it's horses for courses, isn't it? Different. I thrive off that. I love being in the middle of a hedge and pulling pleaches out and chainsawing and chopping. I can do it all day.
I remember talking to a forester years ago. I would do coppice management, and it was like the third day of cutting stools of hazel coppice. I basically said the same thing as, this is a fantastic job and a great place to work. And he said, yeah, right. Imagine doing this when it's really wet, really cold, and you've got the flu, but you still have to do it. I was like, yeah, okay, fair point. I'll take you.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean now, Steve. Yeah. Right. That's a rambling end to the podcast. So you can find all of our stuff at Wild Food People on Instagram and X and Facebook and places like that. We have our Patreon, patreon.com/wildfoodpeople. We have our website where you can book courses and do all sorts of weird and wonderful things with us. We've got some great stuff for 2025. And there's some other links in the show notes for this and some articles that I write and some more stuff about Phil and Amy and all these other things. This episode of the Wild Food People podcast was recorded in a woodland while sat around a fire that's burning bits of ash that we cut down in the meadow about 3 weeks ago. And the tree that we cut them down from basically exploded when it hit the ground because it was riddled with ash dieback and should have been cut down a long time ago. It is a rural and outdoor production.